Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today we have a very special guest, Sam Grundwerg. As I said it right,
You said it right.
right? Is the world chairman of Keren Hayesod, and I see United Israel Appeal.
That's right.
Nachon?
UIA.
Right, UIA. Prior to this, he was served as the Consul General of Israel in Los Angeles, as the senior representative of Israel in the Southwest United States, right? And so you have basically, I think those are the two main things that we're going to talk about today. So first of all, it's great to have you with us. Heard a
Thank
lot of
you.
good things. Before we start, I just want to say that in order to have this conversation, I've been told I have to say this. Please donate to us money so we could have this conversation. So that's so we could continue having these great conversations. So, Sam, we've after October 7th, the entire Jewish world was rocked, and you and your organization is one of the, I think, the biggest and largest organizations that sort of connects between Israel and people who want to help Israel from outside. So maybe give us a little sort of explanation of what you guys do in short and what happened after October 7th.
Sure. So first of all, Ariel, thank you for having me. I'm
Of
very
course.
excited to be here on your podcast, The Western Spirit.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, I have the privilege and the honor of serving now for the past 6 years as world chairman, which is basically the executive chairman of Keren Hayesod, UIA, United Israel Appeal. Keren Hayesod is one of Israel's 4 founding national institutions, or in Hebrew, Mosdot Leumim,
Yeah.
which is a concept probably not so familiar outside of Israel, but there are 4 founding national
And
institutions.
it's because, let me just maybe just also for a word say that it's because Israel was founded like in slow motion. So there was first, before there was a country, there was actual, institutions that were in sort of like a semi-country. So you had like the government, but there wasn't a real government.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just to do modern Zionism
Yeah.
101 for your listeners, but really just in a second. So you have, as part of the modern Zionist movement, you have the World Zionist Organization that was founded by Theodor Herzl, Benjamin Ze'ev Herzl, 1897, with the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. In 1901, Kakal, Keren Kayemet L'Israel, sometimes known as JNF, outside, was founded in 1901 in order to redeem or buy up the lands. And then in 1920, the third of the 4 institutions, which I have the privilege of heading up, Keren Hayesod, was established in 1920 to be the official fundraising organization. And then in 1929, the last of the organizations, which is the Jewish Agency for Israel, HaSochnut HaYehudit, was founded. And as you mentioned, so those were the building blocks that were put together for the establishment of the state that was still on the way. And as you mentioned, so Keren Hayesod was really there along the way in establishing and laying down the groundwork for the country. We were involved not just in fundraising, but in establishing the very first bank, Bank Leumi, whether establishing Hebrew University, establishing the electric company, establishing the cultural institutions, Habima. So all of these things, it was the building blocks for the state of Israel. Fast forward to today, we are a fundraising organization, official fundraising organization. We operate in 45 what we call campaigns or appeals, which are pretty much communities in 60 countries.
Wow.
And it's important for the listeners to understand we operate outside of Israel, even though we're based here. And we also, our fundraising operations with the Jewish communities is the entire Tfutzot, the entire Jewish diaspora, except for the United States. Originally, it included the United States, but then with the development of the organizations there, and today the Jewish Federations of North America, the JFNA, which is a partner of ours, they handle the official fundraising.
So you do everything but North America, America, the U.S.
Canada is included in what we do, right? So everything, what we call the entire non-U.S. diaspora. So that's the background, and can also talk numbers to give you and listeners an idea of.
So maybe so now that we explained the background, let's go
7th.
October 7th. Up until October 7th, you're doing fundraising for Israel. You're giving, basically transferring money from people who want to support Israel to the places that they want to support in Israel. And October 7th happens, and what is the aftermath of this attack on your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So leading up to October 7th, there have always been three major pillars and focus areas of our work. It's important also for me to emphasize that we are a fundraising organization. We are not the organization that carries out
Right.
the operations. The Jewish Agency, which I mentioned, is one of the other four national institutions, or the other three besides us. They are our strategic partner and our primary partner in terms of carrying out the work that is done. So we actually are a 20% stakeholder of the Jewish Agency. That comes with a funding responsibility. And they're not our exclusive beneficiary, but they're our primary beneficiary. So the three focus areas have always been, first and foremost, Aliyah, promoting and bringing Olim. And since our existence, and the existence of the State of Israel, we've helped bring over the decades more than 3.5 million Olim to Israel. The second area is helping strengthen Israeli society, especially the weak members, the weaker populations, the periphery. And then the third area is connecting Israel and Israeli society to diaspora communities. So that's what we've always been the focus area. With October 7th, obviously, it's still within at least a lot of those areas, but we saw a tremendous rising to the occasion, or stepping up to the plate, to use, I guess, an American baseball metaphor.
Even though you're not in America, you don't work in America. So
I don't work in America. I am American, born and raised. You mentioned my...
Yeah, we'll get into that later about Los Angeles also.
So what we saw is in all of our campaigns, in all of our communities, as I mentioned, we're in 60 communities in 45 countries. I mean, our donors and our leadership were, over the years and decades, were donating very generously up until that point. But what we saw was a real rising to the occasion and stepping up, both in terms, first of all, we saw that in terms of the numbers and in terms of the donations. And
how much was percentage-wise the rise of money that came up after October 7th?
So to give you an idea, in 2022, we raised about $185 million for the State of Israel. And in 2023, and the majority of this came in the last 3 months, unfortunately, with October 7th, we raised over $220 million.
And in 24?
In 2024, we're even though we're already in 2025, we're finalizing the numbers, but we're just above $200 million, which is a little bit of a drop off from last year, but that's still incredibly impressive because it's still much higher than our 2022 numbers.
But there's a lot more work to do here.
There's a lot more work to do, but also to run an emergency campaign for 15 months and to keep going back to the donors for more and more. So there's no disappointment there, but that gives you an idea of the numbers. $185 million in 2022 to 220 plus in 2023, and now we finished 2024 with just over $200 million. Mm-hmm. And so obviously it's still within the focus areas of strengthening Israeli society, but obviously there's been a shift to taking care of victims of terror. There's a Jewish Agency-run Fund for the Victims of Terror, which was the focus of our initial emergency campaign. We've also done a lot working with local municipalities.
What about the whole north has been evacuated? There's been Kiryat Shmona, Metula, all these. Kiryat Shmona is a city. It's a major city up north. They've all been evacuated. They're maybe going to start coming back soon, but they're still in hotels, most of them. Has that been also one of your focuses?
It has been one of our focuses, although I have to say we try to be very careful in terms of the philanthropy that we do, not to let the government off the hook.
Yeah,
it's very important.
It's very easy to do that.
It is easy to do that, and that's why we're a national institution, and which means that we have an official seat around the table. We're not just another charitable organization. There are great charitable organizations, especially in Israel, but we have a special status as being a national institution. So we work very closely. It gives us and it gives us access to cooperation, especially when it comes to Aliyah and other things, in a way that other organizations don't have. But we're very careful about not letting the government off the hook. So when it comes to dealing with the evacuees, we do what we can, we've done what we can, but not in a way that lets the government off the hook. So we work very closely with the local municipalities, both in the south and the north, directly and also through the Jewish Agency. And we've also, a lot of the emergency funds that we've raised, besides for the Jewish Agency Fund for Victims of Terror and directly to municipalities, have gone for a lot of hospitals, again, both in the North and the South, as well as assistance to citizens, as you mentioned, and a lot of work to be done. And now, of course, the big focus
It's rebuilding.
is rebuilding, but it's also resilience, mental health, and trauma.
Yeah, and we just saw here in Israel a few stories about how much soldiers, for example, have left the fighting forces because of traumas and psychological issues, and they're all going to need a lot of help. You're going to have thousands, I think, of soldiers coming off the battlefield seeing horrible things, and so it's going to be a big project here. A bunch of things came up as you were talking that I didn't even think of asking, but let me just ask you two things. Before the October 7th, we saw in Israel a huge mass protests. The society was fractured. We still are very much so. Did this reflect in the way Jewish people outside of Israel spoke to you about Israel? Meaning, when up until these crazy protests happened and then October 7th happened, it was like a roller coaster. We had years of roller coaster politically, but how did Jews outside of Israel look at Israeli Jews fighting with each other? What did they say? What did they feel in general?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that, because I did want to relate to that. Leading up to October 7th in 2023, of course, the whole issue of those protests and talk of judicial reform started, as you'll recall, already in the very early, in the first month
January.
January 2023. And without even getting into the politics of it and the different sides of it, I can tell you, and I'll be very frank and honest, in the beginning, I didn't want to even believe it or admit to myself that it had an impact on the fundraising.
Yeah.
But it was a fact that I could not ignore. And I could tell you, Ariel, that it absolutely, the lack of unity, the inside fighting, the divisiveness, it absolutely had a negative impact on the donations. And again, it's not even
it's not political. It's the fact that people see that everybody hates each other here. They don't want to get involved.
Exactly. And I could tell you that already by the middle point of the year in 2023, I travel the world a lot for my job. I would say about half of the time I'm traveling around to the different campaigns. And I can tell you that I sat across from donors and very committed Zionists who simply wanted to take a step back. And this is where I talked about earlier the special positioning and ma'amad and stance of Keren Hayesod as a national institution, but it has two sides to that coin. For the most part, it's viewed as a very positive thing, which we're very proud to talk about how we're a national institution, a seat around the table. But when something like that happened with the fighting over the judicial reform and all of the protests, all of a sudden what we saw with some, but enough to make a big difference, of the leadership and the donors, is they simply wanted to take a step back. And I sat across from donors who gave very generously over the years, who simply said, this year, because of what's going on and the fact that you are a national institution, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to still support Israel, but in a different way. Now,
because you're considered like part of the establishment, and so that people we don't want to get involved with the establishment because it's so controversial and all that.
Correct. Now, of course, I and others and my partners, I worked very closely with Stephen Lowy from Sydney, Australia. I'm the chair of Keren Hayesod's board of directors until just a few months ago, and for 5.5 years he was chair of the board of trustees. He and I would explain to a donor like that by holding back their donation to Keren Hayesod, they're not sending any message to the establishment, but it's only harming the beneficiary, which is the Oleh Hadash, whether it's from Russia, Ukraine, or from France. And it's hurting the elderly Holocaust survivor who we support through Amigur and other projects. But the truth is, it wasn't. For the most part, a donor like that, it was an emotional thing, and I think they felt powerless. They live outside of Israel. They saw we
also felt powerless here. I think most Israelis didn't, even on both sides, were like, what is happening here? We feel like everything is like so breakable, so fragile, and society, like I think most people were very surprised about the reactions on both sides, the fact that no one could get to compromises, and
you're right. And so it it adversely affected the donations. And I can tell you that going into October 1st, 2023, which was going into the last quarter of
Yeah.
2023, we were going into a year that looked like a pretty bad year financially. Now, obviously, I would have been happy to finish the year very poorly and not have October 7th happen. But then October 7th did happen, and it was like everything that you and I just discussed just disappeared.
Yes.
Completely disappeared. And some of those same donors who I sat across just a few months prior to October 7th and explained to me that they were not going to give to Keren Hayesod because we were too close to the establishment, it all disappeared, and they really rose to the occasion. First of all, with their generosity in their giving. But I can tell you also what we saw was in communities all around the world and in many countries and regions, because we're, as I mentioned, in the entire non-U.S. diaspora, we saw a real reawakening of Jewish identity and activism.
That's my next question. So one of the things that I've been doing interviews with people all over the world. I'm in our English podcast, in Hebrew, obviously not, because most people around the world don't speak Hebrew, so naturally. But one of the things that keeps on coming up with people who are Jewish, but very secular and very not Jewish in their day-to-day lives, let's say, is that, like, for example, I interviewed Ilya Shapiro. He was in charge of the Constitutional Center at Cato and then at Georgetown, and then he was thrown out of Georgetown. But the point is that one of the things that he told me was after October 7th, he was never, ever, his parents are from the Soviet Union. They didn't come to Israel really. He suddenly felt Jewish.
Yes.
He suddenly said, oh, I want to take my kids and my family to go to the Jewish center here, even if it's not a synagogue, and I want to meet other Jews and be together. And I said to him, is this just you? He said, no, I live around DC and in Virginia, and all the Jews here suddenly are coming together. There's WhatsApp groups, there's Facebook groups, they're reaching out to each other. They feel a need. And as I said to him, do you think, as maybe I want to ask you too, do you think this is a one-time thing that, when October 7th wears out, a lot of this will also wear out? He said, maybe a little bit, but there's something more happened than just a one-time thing. Do you agree with that?
I do agree. I think that it was maybe a one-time thing, but it was such a significant thing that happened that I think we're seeing that all over the world. I'm seeing that all over the world, and I think it will have a lasting effect. Some people call it October 8th Jews or October 7th Jews. I guess October 8th because of the reaction the day after. And I've seen it on a personal level, even with friends and family members that I have in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel. But in an organized way across organizations, across countries and communities. Because I think, Ariel, what we see is that whereas before October 7th, there was a reality where people were able to be on the fence or complacent, or simply, at least outwardly, not having to pick a side or to take a stance and identify. October 7th came, and the reaction to October 7th, even maybe more so than October 7th itself in the U.S., was
and all over the world,
the world, for sure. The hypocrisy and just the outrage over the reaction or lack of reaction that a lot of those Jews, young and not so young, they simply could not be complacent anymore, and they had to come out. And for some, it expresses itself in a religious way. We see also, I've seen a lot of that as well. Where people are embracing their Jewish identity in terms of religion. In others, it's more in terms of advocacy and activism, community involvement. It's also not something that's mutually exclusive.
Right.
Some people, obviously, it's a mix of everything.
So I guess the next question is exactly about the reaction. So one of the things, I was not so long ago in New York, and I happened to be, it's very not usual for me. I went to this dinner because I was writing about it with a lot of rich Jewish billionaires and billionaires, literally. It's not for me. No, I didn't get anything out of it except for a story that I wrote in the paper. But
and hopefully dinner
was good.
Okay.
But my point is that a lot of them, it seemed to me, said things to the effect of they were in shock because a lot of their allies that they thought were their allies up until that moment up until they needed them. The Jews needed their allies. Just either just ignore them or stab them in the back. So I interviewed Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who's the head of Reform Judaism in North America, which is, they have, if I'm not mistaken, about 3 million Jews or Reform Jews, identify as Reform Jews. And he said to me, and it was in Globes and in the podcast, so you could read it in Hebrew and listen to it in English. He said that a lot of his friends who were for Black Lives Matter movement, who were from progressive organizations, where he, in the Reform movement, would send volunteers to help them in their protests, and they suddenly just turned their backs on him. And some of them protested outside of synagogues of the Reform Jewish movement that was helping them all through the years. So do you also, when you speak to donors, when you speak to people who are powerful people in the Jewish community all over the world, do a lot of them, especially those who, it's a new type of anti-Semitism, a lot of this. Like when I was young in America, you had the skinheads, they were all on the margins. Now you go to a campus, a professor, a dean sometimes of these campuses is like a full-blown anti-Semite.
So it's interesting, I'm a little bit older than you, or maybe I'm being generous to myself there, more than a little bit. But when we say,
Not going to get into that.
When we say a new form of anti-Semitism, I think everything's relative to our experiences. I really do believe en chadash tachat hashemesh, there's nothing new under the sun. You can argue that what you're describing as a new anti-Semitism is simply the old anti-Semitism. We live in an era where, because of the Holocaust happening roughly 80 years ago, we've grown up in a sense, and in the decades until really recently, I would say probably till 10, 20 years ago, it was incredibly politically incorrect and not acceptable anti-Semitism. But what we're seeing today is not necessarily new. It's new in our lifetime.
Yes.
Definitely new in our lifetime. But it's actually going back to the way things were for centuries beforehand.
And let me just interrupt something very interesting, because you're right. When I interviewed Professor Neil Ferguson, one of the biggest historians, he said that in the Germans, the first people who legitimized the Nazis was the academia. The German universities and the German professors and intelligentsia were the ones that gave credence that it was okay to be a Nazi, that it was fine, that it was just another expression. And not only that, there was, mamash support and protests, pro-Nazi protests in campus, and it was supported by the campuses. So, yeah.
You're absolutely right. So it is correct to say that it's new in, say, our lifetime or lifetimes. But I think, unfortunately, it's going back to the way it used to be.
Yeah.
And yes, to your question, I am hearing from a lot of our donors and business leaders that they're experiencing, even in business and otherwise, and they were very surprised and obviously disappointed to learn these are the types of watershed moments when you learn who your real friends are, and who your friends aren't. But it goes to the same point that you had earlier about you see the reaction from the hate and the anti-Semitism and the non-Jews, but you also see it forces Jews who were on the fence on actively associating and identifying with Israel in a public way to no longer be complacent and to come out of the closet, so to speak, on that.
Can I also ask you about non-Jews who support Israel? Because I know that you have a lot of connections in the Christian Zionist community in America and the world.
Yes.
So maybe just explain how, first of all, why would, I know this is like a dumb question maybe, but it's the basic question. Why would someone put their head out in the, stick their head out for us? Like, why would someone even want to support it? There's only downside, it seems.
It's a great question, and there's more than one answer. From my experience, yes, Keren Hayesod, long before I joined, I mentioned I've been in my position for 6 years, but Keren Hayesod has been working with what we call our Christian Friends of Israel for quite some time now. I am very proud. I think that under the period of time that I've been here, I think we've only grown and strengthened that support and deepened the relationships. And so there are many reasons. First of all, it's important for the listeners to understand that there is such a thing as what's called a Christian Zionist.
Yes.
They're a Christian Zionist.
Our new ambassador to Israel calls himself from the U.S. a Christian
Yes,
Zionist.
Mike Huckabee. I've had the pleasure of meeting him and getting to know him. He's a
He calls himself.
wonderful man.
He
He's
wanted to buy a house in your place in Efrat.
Efrat. He's right. He's an evangelic pastor. By the way, he's also a good musician. We
Yes.
get to that also.
Yeah, with the rock and roll thing.
With the rock and roll, because there's a connection with him. But right, so there are to answer your question, there are evangelic. There's part of the Christian what's called faith-based diplomacy, and the belief that supporting Israel for the evangelics is that they believe as part of their faith and fulfilling Bible prophecy. It actually goes back to a really very simple principle. They were in the book of Bereshit, in Genesis 12:3, it says that those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those that curse Israel will be cursed. And they simply want to be on the blessed side of that equation. And they'll explain that that's the reason they support. There's also the idea that in order for what they believe their Messiah to come back, there has to be an ingathering of the exiles, which is also why they support Aliyah specifically as part of their work. But I can tell you from my pretty extensive relationships with Christian leaders, it goes beyond, in most cases, it goes beyond just that religious belief. And there really is a moral identification with Judeo-Christian values, and also understanding that hate always oftentimes starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews.
Yes, exactly.
And there really is a more, and I got to tell you, that is something that I've seen in my work since October 7th. Leading up to October 7th, working with Christians, there was a focus on Aliyah, and we saw in 2022 with the Russian-Ukraine war, and there was a huge spike in Aliyah. We saw a lot of our Christian supporters really also step up to the plate there. But with October 7th, and it wasn't necessarily an Aliyah-based thing, we saw based on the true, sincere, and genuine love for the Jewish people and love for Israel. It's nothing short of heartwarming and inspiring.
Yes, I agree. And I think a lot of Israelis, especially on the religious, more extreme right, are very scared of boogeyman. And I think just as an American who reads a lot of people that you obviously meet, I think that's misplaced a little bit. So
it is misplaced, but I do want to say I understand where that comes from. And we also, I want to say, Keren Hayesod and me personally, we're very cautious.
Yes.
And we won't necessarily just get involved in a donor Keren Hayesod relationship. Regardless of what the numbers are, we won't necessarily just take money and accept donations and financial support from any Christian friends of Israel. There's a very fine line that we're very careful not to cross in terms of those that are involved in proselytizing and trying to convert. And so the Christian friends and donors that we work with understand that, and we're very cautious. So I understand where the skepticism.
Well, yeah. Once you know that someone is taking the precautions, then obviously, I guess this is more of an. After we said about all the support for Israel, I just want to get one of the things that you said that you guys work in is supporting, obviously, Aliyah and Israeli social cohesion, helping people in Israel that need help. Obviously not taking away from the government. We said that already.
Right, but working with them. We actually like to leverage and matching government dollars with philanthropy dollars is something that's very important to donors.
So my next question is that we've been hearing in the last few days, few months even, that there's a Yerida. So we've been hearing that a lot of people is Aliyah. We spoke about the Ukraine-Russian war. A lot of Jews. I had a program about this here, that not only are they coming because they're running away, a lot of these people are very, very educated, have a lot of money from Ukraine and Russia. That's not everyone, but a lot of them do. And on the other hand, we've been hearing in the last month or so, there's been numbers thrown out, arguing about the exact numbers.
Yeah, I read something like 82,000. I don't know if these numbers are...
No, it only takes into account... people who left. It doesn't take into account people who came back, and so you have to. But there is a significant, probably it seems to me, of people who are leaving. And so, what do you, just in general, what do you think Israel can do? What can organizations like you do? What is there anything to be done? Is there, or maybe just the situation is that in order to live in Israel, you need to be very brave, and some people just don't want to deal with a lot of this stuff.
Well, I think, first of all, it's a good question. Taking a step back, I think one of the things that we've come to see, not only from October 7th, but actually more so from the war in Russia-Ukraine, that the idea of this modern state of Israel since 1948 as not just the realization of the Zionist dream of the return of the Jewish people to their homeland, but the idea of a Jewish state as a place of refuge for Jews. I think that before 2022 and the war in Ukraine, I think that most of us stopped looking at Israel as a place of refuge. And then all of a sudden, that war happened, February 22, with Russia and Ukraine. And Aliyah spiked. Just to give you an idea, the number spiked from like an average of 30 to 35,000 olim a year to 75,000.
Yeah.
And so it more than doubled. And so we saw that it was still very relevant in 2022, 3, 4, 5, that Israel is still a place of refuge for the Jewish people. Now, an organization like Keren Hayesod, as important as we are, a national institution, we won't be able to solve all of the problems of Israel. So in terms of the brain drain and losing Israelis that are making Yerida,
that are leaving,
if that term is even still used, but that are leaving.
Relocation.
It is a great concern, but I think that we do have an important role to play because together with the Jewish agencies I mentioned, Aliyah and encouraging Aliyah and facilitating Aliyah has always been one of the main core areas, and now it's more important than ever. It's true that you said you have to be brave to come to Israel. That was even before October 7th. Now we're still in arguably a 7-front war. Add to it an 8th front if you take global anti-Semitism for the Jewish people. Now, when it comes to Aliyah, and we could talk about personal experiences, you made Aliyah, I made Aliyah, different reasons. There are things that push you towards Aliyah, and there are things that pull you to make Aliyah. So if you're coming from some of these countries where the anti-Semitism is terrible, or if you're fleeing
a war,
Ukraine and war in Russia, or if you talk about Aliyah from Ethiopia, so that's mostly you're talking about Aliyah out of necessity. As opposed to Aliyah from, say, the more Western North America, where it's Aliyah of choice. But I think for most people, you have pushes and pulls. I think our job and our role, first of all, the role of the establishment of Israel, the Ministry of Aliyah, who we work very closely with, is to put programs and campaigns into place that make it easier and that really will give an incentive, financial and otherwise, bureaucracy, making things easier to bring olim, and then that's where we come in, our organizations, with the philanthropy of providing funds and the financial resources to leverage what the government's doing. Together with the Jewish Agency, there's the vision as part of, you mentioned rebuilding. A big part of that rebuilding of Israel, whether it's the South and the North, and both together, also involves diaspora Jewry coming and making Aliyah and making, whether it's the Western Negev or the North, not only to rebuild what was there before, but to make it bigger and stronger and everlasting.
Yeah, and I'll just say one thing that you don't have to respond to because it's maybe a little bit political, is that if a government and a country wants people to stay, they should make it easier for people to stay. So I think, and again, don't respond because I know you want to not get into this kind of stuff, but we do need the people in charge here to make it easier for people who are working and raising families. And like you said, we don't want organizations to come and help and do the government's job. We need the government to be more, the right word to make it easier on people to live here. And so people want to live, like you said, like what you said, there's two different types of aliyahs. There's people who are running away from trouble and people who are coming to here from places that are less trouble.
That's
and
right.
if you want them to stay here, especially people who have money work in high tech, they could go and work anywhere on their computer. They could sit in Cyprus in a coffee shop. I have a friend who moved to Cyprus. He moved because it was tough for him, the bureaucracy, all the like stresses here and raising a family. So he moved there and he's fine. He's working in the same place. The government needs to make it easier for people to work, to raise families, to, to feel like they're like the people in charge hear them. And so that's just my
I have no problem saying I totally
okay.
agree with that.
I just wanted to keep you.
The government has to do its part, but
Yeah.
and organizations like mine and ours and Israeli society also.
Nachon. So, and also the another thing is what we mentioned in the first part was the protest and the social cohesion. People don't want to be in a place where they feel everything is any day could crumble.
That's right.
They want to feel like things are, stable, yatziv, that the karka yitziva, that the ground under them is stable, and that not every day some other crazy person does something and everybody's like, oh, and everything could fall apart. So I think that's the other part. I want to ask you now about your time as the consulate in LA. So what Hollywood and Jews? Everybody thinks the Jews control Hollywood,
Right.
but usually after October 7th and other times, it seems like we're not really controlling, you know what I mean? Like the support hasn't been that amazing from America's celebrity class.
There are a few that stand out, but I'll say generally, first of all, it's important to understand the timing. Yeah, I had the privilege and honor to serve as Israel's Consul General in Los Angeles, representing to the entire Southwest. So I was based in LA, but my region was like half of California and 6 other states in the Southwest. And I served there in 2016, 17, and 18. So it was right after
Trump.
Right. It was I came in just
crazy
before,
time.
right, just before the elections. And part of the mandate, I was a political appointee. I'm not a career foreign ministry person. I was appointed by then Foreign Minister Netanyahu, who was also Prime Minister. Yeah. And one of the key mandates and tasks that he set in front of me to focus on was obviously not exclusively, but to focus besides the regular task of strengthening the relationships and working with elected officials and communities, but to deal with the entertainment industry in Hollywood simply because of the understanding of whether you like it or not, right? We may not like it or not as parents, but the influence and the opinion shapers and the effect that it has, the bang for your buck, is tremendous. So I put a lot of time and effort into building relationships and trying to carry out initiatives that impacted the way that Hollywood would portray Israel, whether it was, first of all, trying to bring Hollywood types. And by the way, it's not always the big celebrities. Sometimes it's executives, actually more so, who are not necessarily recognized faces and names, but they actually have.
They make the decisions.
Right. That's more when you talk about this, the myth about control of Hollywood. But a lot of those decision makers are key, but also the celebrities, and also to try and promote as much as possible filming projects either in Israel physically or about Israel. And so I did quite a bit of that. It's not as glamorous as it all sounds, because it's the payoff is great when you succeed, but it's a lot of hard work trying to get to the right people.
But what was the just in general, when you speak with people in Hollywood, are they a lot of them like in the closet in terms of like, not what I mean is they would say, we support you, but it'll hurt our career if we go too much out of our way to support you. So, you know what I mean?
So what you're describing, Ariel, is exactly what I encountered, but they wouldn't necessarily say it in words, but they would say it in action. I'll give you an example. I was there at my last year there, my last few months before I ended my diplomatic posting, was when we marked and celebrated Israel's 70th year of independence, the 70th Yom Ha'atzmaut. And I decided that we were the consulate was gonna put on a never done before event, a huge event done at Universal Studios to make it Hollywood. And we got a lot of big stars and put together, really it was a script. It wasn't like a typical, if you've ever been to one of these, and I'm not belittling, but there's like kind of a template for a typical
red carpet event,
Misrad HaChutz type of a Yom Ha'atzmaut event with cocktails and speeches. What we did was very Hollywood. It was all scripted, even the parts that I did, everything was scripted, and we divided the 7 decades of Israel into different topics, and we had different celebrities presenting each topic. But in leading up to that event, I went around. I first of all made very good friends and partnered with somebody from the community who I met, David Fishoff. David Fishoff, we can talk about in the context of the rock and roll initiative and rock and roll fantasy camp. David and I became great friends. David is somebody who's very connected in the entertainment industry in general, but also specifically music, and also with sports. He runs something called Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp. He was the manager of Ringo Starr for 15 years. He used to be a sports agent representing many professional athletes. And just as a volunteer from the community, as somebody who was a friend of mine and somebody who was a Zionist and a very strong Jew and committed to Israel, he and I went around preparing for this Israel 70th, and we met with, opening doors wasn't a problem. We met with many prominent Jews in Hollywood. And I can tell you, to your question, this is a short answer to your long question, as Ron Dermer likes to say, that when we sat with these folks, they and I believe it was genuine. They talked about how they were on board and they wanted to help. At the end of the day, we put on an amazing event, but only a very small number of them actually came through. And I think it's because of what you said. At least this is before October 7th. It may be even more so with some, but others may have come out. There was definitely a concern that by coming out publicly and taking a stance in support of Israel was going to hurt their careers, whether it was, and it didn't matter whether they were writers or producers or actors. And you could tell that nobody wanted to take a stance that was too public or too much out there, because for fear that it was going to affect the next gig that they were or weren't going to get. So that was kind of a wake-up call. Honestly, it was disappointing, but we saw what we were up against. And, like this, I guess going back to another sports metaphor, you got to, in order to hit a few home runs, you gotta strike out many times and swing the bat. So even though many of them did not come through because of that concern, we had an amazing event with Billy Crystal.
Oh wow!
And many other big stars. He was the headline, but we had a whole number of both American, Jewish and non-Jews from Hollywood. Mayim Bialik. We had Kelsey Grammer, who's not Jewish, from Frasier, who I'm still in touch with these folks to this day, and they're amazing friends of Israel. We saw that it takes hard work.
But I also think, just to start for cutting off, is that a lot of it is a generational thing. So if you look at like the TikTok stars of today, they really are most of them are very anti-Israeli, and the older stars most of them are very pro-Israel. A lot of them, I don't know about most, but a lot of them.
Right.
I think and we did a few episodes about this, that the generational gap with America, but also with Israel. The fact is that 18 to 24-year-olds in America are a lot less likely to support Israel. And I think maybe this is another, not you guys, because you guys are more philanthropy towards Israel from America, but I think a lot of Israelis need to know that we need to do work in America's youth, because if not, the next generation of American leaders are coming out of America's youth that are a lot less supportive, let's put it just that way, towards Israel. So
that's true. But to your point earlier, it's also an opportunity, as much as it's a concern about the generational gap, because of October 7th happening, because of this, the October 8th Jew phenomenon and this reawakening. There's an opportunity to act now with that younger generation that have woken up, and to get them on board. And so that requires, really being active, proactive, even aggressive in order to do that.
Finally, let's talk about this rock and roll fantasy camp, right? Fantasy camp.
Rock and roll fantasy.
So give us, tell us what it's about. It sounds very interesting.
So as I mentioned, when I was in LA as consul general, I became very close friends, but also collaborated on these Israel events together with my friend David Fishoff. By the way, besides the Israel 70th that we did together, he also helped me when I was in Los Angeles for one of I think it was 2017 in Ramadan. I wanted to host a Ramadan event at the official residence where I lived as consul general, and wanted to bring a prominent
Imam?
Muslim, not an imam, but a Muslim. And also being in Los Angeles, I decided that I was going to try to bring Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And with David Fishoff's help, we were able to reach Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. We had him at the house. It was an unbelievable event. And we held a discussion with leaders from the Muslim community, the Jewish community, about Israel-Muslim relations at the time. And then we stopped. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I assume your listeners all know who he is, but the Hall of Fame NBA basketball player. He and other Muslims led a prayer service, which was amazing if you think about this. We're talking about the residence of the State of Israel, owned by the State of Israel, where I lived as consul general. We clear out the furniture in the living room. They lay down the prayer rugs. They do the prayer. The fast ends as the sun goes down, and we went outside and had a breakfast meal after the discussion. It was an unbelievable thing. So moving forward to today, so I mentioned that what David Fishoff has done for the last almost 30 years is he runs something called a rock and roll fantasy camp, which, in short, because of his vast connections with musicians, especially in the rock world, a lot of these bands from the 80s and 90s, I guess before your time, but you have musicians, kind of not professional musicians, but a lot of kind of lay musicians who have a day job as lawyers, accountants, whatever they might do, and they love either playing guitar, playing the drums, or jamming or singing, and they pay a lot of money to go and spend 4 days, kind of like a long weekend, with these rock stars, these real rock stars who will give master classes, and they form bands, and they're able to play together and learn. And it's something he's been doing, like I said, for almost 30 years, where people's dreams come true. And what happened was David came to Israel from Los Angeles shortly after October 7th. This was last December. And he asked me, he said, Sam, I'd really like to, I know what you do in Keren Hayesod. He said, I'd like to go down to the kibbutzim in the south and see what happened. And it happened to be that we had an existing Keren Hayesod, a small delegation from Latin America, mostly from Brazil, São Paulo, that was going. And I said, no problem, David, I can add you to this delegation. I didn't join. I had been so many times, and I didn't join that day, but David went. And what happened while he was there, they were meeting with folks from the municipalities in the south. Actually, the person, our good friend Michal Uziyahu, who's today the mayor of Eshkol, or the head of the regional council of Eshkol. At the time, she was a council member, and she was meeting with the group. And then she said, I'm sorry, I have to excuse myself because I have to go to a funeral. And he said, whose funeral? And this was the funeral of Yotam Chaim.
Yeah, the kidnapped, one of the kidnapped people who by mistake was shot by the IDF, tragically.
Exactly. He was one of the three, the Gingy, the redhead.
The redhead.
Who was also a drummer.
Yes.
And so David and the rest of the Keren Hayesod delegation joined Michal. They went to this funeral. It was outdoors, a few thousand people. And Yotam's brother, Tuval, who's also a drummer, played a drum solo for, I don't know, about 10 minutes. I mean, it was something that moved everyone who was there, but also David, who'd never experienced anything like that. And at the end of Tuval's drum solo, his father and Yotam's father threw the drumsticks in the grave. And it was just, such a moving thing. So that evening, after this whole day, and that was just one of the experiences, they visited the Nova site, they visited near Oz and other places. And that night in Jerusalem in December, I had dinner with David, and he was kind of unpacking the day and got very emotional. And he said to me, Sam, if I could just have given Yotam, or to give his brother Tuval, if I can give some of these Israelis who are suffering so much the experience of rock and roll fantasy camp, I know I can change their lives. And from that, the idea came about that we were going to partner together, which is something that on paper probably looks so unlikely, that Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp would do something together with Keren Hayesod, which is a national institution that's been around over 100 years. And we decided that with our Keren Hayesod connections with the residents and the municipality leaders, that we would, with our great Keren Hayesod staff and team, we set out to find about 10 Israeli heroes, survivors that are musicians that either went through, one of them survived the Nova Music Festival. Many of the others were from the kibbutzim, or soldiers who were injured in fighting, that were musicians that fit the profile of attending the Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp. And David said that he has the Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp at the time coming up in March. It was March 2024 in LA. And so we set out to identify and find 10 Israelis. We raised the funds, and we brought these 10 Israelis to Los Angeles to participate in a camp, together with 75 just regular rock and roll campers who paid a lot of money, most of them not Jewish, most of them didn't know really anything about Israel. And they played with stars from Van Halen and Whitesnake and Skid Row, and really big names. And we also did a big event beforehand in the Jewish community for those that stand with Israel and Israel advocacy. We partnered with our good friend David Renzer from Creative Community for Peace that work against the forces of boycott and BDS. And we did this opening event that actually took place at the home of a good friend of mine. At the time, he's still my good friend, but at the time it was his home, Sam DeLug. It was the famous Menendez brothers mansion, which he bought in early in 2000. And the Israelis performed there. And the bottom line of what we saw was, it was simply a human experience of understanding and witnessing how music heals and music brings people together. We heard from these 10 Israelis about how, at that time, it was 4, 5, 6 months after October 7th. Many of them were not able to even get out of bed, not to mention go back to music, but interact. And I'm not saying that this 5-day experience
solved everything.
Alone solved everything, but based on their own words, it absolutely was a major catalyst to help getting them going again and getting them living again, not just in terms of music. Music was the vehicle, but it's an unbelievable thing to have been involved in.
Sam, it was a pleasure talking to you. I have to say that you're doing very important work, and I could have spoken to you more because I had more questions, and we could have spoken also about...
You'll have to invite me back.
Our mutual growing up in the States, different backgrounds, but although we found out that you did speak to... You were at the Lubavitcher Rebbe pretty much when I was there too, so...
the late 80s,
early 90s.
Early 90s.
Yeah, so Sam, let me just get your name right every time. Grundwerg, right?
Got that right? Right.
Sam Grundwerg, it was a pleasure talking to you, and keep up doing your important work. And for anyone who wants to check you guys out from outside of Israel, Keren Hayesod,
just Google
you,
see our
and
website.
I assume there's places people could donate there and check you guys out. So that's number one. Number two, you guys could donate to me and buy me coffee to keep us able to provide you with good content. And so thank you guys so much. And thank you so much. And
thank you for having me, Ariel. I appreciate that. I do want to say that I hope that by the time your listeners are hearing this, I hope that all of the hostages are returned to Israel. And we need to get all of our hostages back, those that are alive, those that aren't alive. And until we do that, we're not going to be able to really start to heal properly as a society. And thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure for me. I very much enjoyed it and look forward to coming on again.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Western Spirit Podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. See you next time.